We're live.
Okay, we're going over some budget language with the Commissioner of Corrections. And I'm going to turn it over to the Commissioner if he has concerns. But I don't think I've got the right pages of the budget.
Those are the pages I was told. What?
Yeah, but this is all forests and parks.
I don't know, that's what Andrew told me. I did post the whole thing. On the
Okay,
website.
well, let's start with page 120. I think that's where your section starts.
Okay.
Hopefully, that starts with the out-of-state bed carry forward.
Okay. One thing I would call out, it was on page 106. I know we started on 108, but on page 106, there is a section of the workforce bill that's $500,000 for supervisory and some leadership training. Certainly that's training that we continue to be interested in, but we think that one, that funding isn't supported in the governor's budget. And so we would not support that. But also we think that money, if it were available, could be better spent somewhere else. So just wanted to flag that. That was 106.
Page 106.
Going to 120. It looks like the department section starts on the bottom. The initial part here is really the allocation of out-of-state bed savings to specific justice reinvestment goals or projects.
Yep.
The House assigned $250,000 to the community justice centers. That's in addition to $347,000 that Joint Justice Oversight had committed for that same purpose. So I wanted to flag that for you all. $250,000 were set aside for specific reentry services for women at the women's facility in South Burlington. We continue to support those types of efforts. I may recommend that instead of calling out specific groups, we move to just frame that as women's reentry services, knowing that those 4 providers as listed are the primary providers of those services. But I think, you know, we typically
prefer to have the ability to contract whomever you'd like.
Right, that's right. And as you know, we do this through grant funding. So we'll put out a grant, they will apply, we'll provide them the resources. But that's the typical process. So by calling it out, it complicates that process a bit. But certainly we support the work that they're doing. The 4 groups that are listed here do amazing work for the incarcerated women at CRCF. In the original Senate ask, there was $1 million set aside for the department's intelligence layer request. This is to remind the committee.
You still need $1 million?
We do, and we'd like the $500,000 to go back to $1 million because the project will actually likely cost more than that. So we're beginning to pool the money here. And you had written language in, and I'm not sure if it's in here or another part of the bill, that said that we could use that money over multiple years. So it enables us to pool the money basically to afford the project.
Senator,
can you just give me a quick rundown again of what the intelligence system is for and what it does?
Sure. So the department has, it's a vendor management system, which is basically our data backbone. That's where all the data gets dumped into. We use that not only to hold data, but also to do some case planning. All the files as they relate to incarcerated individuals are in there, but it is a very complicated manual system. An intelligence layer will sit on the top of that and basically reach down and grab the data it needs, and then in the layer conduct analysis. It has case planning that would start from booking all the way through somebody's community supervision. It would enable us to give case planning access to community-based providers who are supporting the case management for an individual. So say you're incarcerated, we plan with you for reentry. One of the things you need on the outside is some type of substance use programming. When you go outside, we could then give access to your provider so that they can see only the part of the file that they need to, but it creates a more seamless case management system across the site.
just the last in the Budget Adjustment Act this May, well, no, this March or February, I guess, there was $1 million in the budget adjustment that the governor had proposed for this process. There was also $300,000, I believe, for domestic violence programs.
That's right.
And the House and Senate agreed to hold off on the $1 million until the big bill that provided the $300,000 for domestic violence programs and budget adjustment. Then the House came back to the bill, even though they had agreed to the $1 million being held off, and only put in $500,000. That's really the history of that particular funding. Justice Oversight went over the funding back in December,
Right.
and approved the 1,300 or the 1,300,000 for the two different uses.
And the other thing I would call out here is, you know, one of the primary findings of the CSG report on justice reinvestment was that the department needed to invest in new modern data analysis systems. This is the best system that we could come up with, and it would touch every single incarcerated individual and every single member on community supervision in our system. There's no other thing that we're doing right now that touches every single member, or every single person that we're serving.
Senator,
Is this the same system that would be used to manage pretrial detainees that have been released into the community and provide those notifications that we talked about in S27?
No,
Okay.
I don't believe so. I'm not familiar with the system you're talking about, but we don't
Would-
largely handle folks
Okay.
who are out in the community pre-trial.
Okay.
but the $1 million would be over a period of 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, I think the goal would be to pool the $1 million.
The idea is you're
add
gonna
to
fund it now while we've got money, and
And it's really primarily an upfront cost that then has an O&M kind of tail to it that we would manage through the regular budget.
And I have one more question, going back to subsection A and the $1 million at the bottom of page 120. That $1 million, I just want to fully understand where it's coming from. That's, yeah, can you just dive deeper?
So we have an out-of-state contract to house people currently in Mississippi. The contract is for up to 350 individuals, but the state only budgets for currently 160. We only have 125 individuals out of state. That number has fluctuated some over the years, but each year, whatever the delta between the amount we spent and the amount we budgeted is grabbed and brought back to the state solely for the purpose of reinvestment in JR2 initiatives. And so that's where this last year, it was 1.9 million total. About 900, well, I guess about 600 was allocated during JR2, or I'm sorry, Joint Justice over the summer, leaving about 1.3, which is what we're looking at right now.
Gotcha. Thank you.
The only other thing I'd call out about the intelligence layer that I think is really important that we should take on as a department and hopefully as a state is it would provide us with a capacity to map our entire system to identify where disparity is happening. And so that could be racial disparity, could be gender disparity, whatever, but we would start to see points in the process where we know disparity is happening and we can then dig in on that to begin to resolve and make the system more equitable, which is one of our primary values and one of the primary things that we articulated as our mission. And so this tool presents a lot of promise for us in ways that the department has never had access to that type of analysis previously.
okay. The next section is C103, I think, or no, I'm sorry. C111, which is unexpended funds transfer justice reinvestment. You okay with that?
Yes, so this is the language I was speaking about just previously, where it unlocks the money to be spent over multiple years, which would really help us as we look at these types of investments.
Okay. And then we get to E, while you're repealing the other report, I guess.
Yeah.
Senator Sears,
Yeah.
is this the report that we spent all that time with No, different one?
No, the one in
Thank you.
Justice Reinvestment 2, no.
I think you're referring to S14.
Yes.
Yes, which is currently in House Judiciary with testimony on that second. The part that the Senate passed is still fully intact as far as I recall. So that part's good. I think we're in good shape there. They're adding a council to make recommendations on how to spend justice reinvestment money in addition to
A
the.
council?
Is that how you'd phrase it, Ben?
Yeah, it's called, right now, the Coordinated Justice Reform Advisory Council.
Oh, for Christ's sake.
That's exactly what we. Task force.
We just need another council who's, my God. what
And
is
if the
justice-
council could have a work group.
Why don't we do away with justice oversight? I'm sorry, I'm not, I'll let, excuse me, I forgot I'm on. It never ceases to amaze me.
I mean, I think we started.
They just
with a bit
can't
of a
help
work-
themselves.
Yeah. I think we started on that bill with a bit of a work group, but we heard from a lot of the stakeholders that they just couldn't do it.
Right. All right, I'm sorry, I apologize for that little order. I can't believe they're gonna add. Hold on. We're not voting any more bills out of here, till we get some movement on our bills.
I like it.
Where's the next section of yours? Luckily, you don't have to go through all these pages.
That's right. I think the next section starts on 144, but I'm struggling to
144.
see our part of that.
Oh, yeah. To repeal the racial advisory panel. And certainly not aviation jet fuel.
Although we have talked a lot about wanting a helicopter.
I
recently.
understand that.
Spend a lot of time on the road. Do you know what the 144?
Can I ask a,
No, I don't see it.
That's a little just there.
can I ask a quick technical question? This might be for Ben. Page 144, section 8, the repeal. So it looks like we're repealing a repeal that would get rid of the executive director, the racial equity advisory panel. So in other words, that job is now permanent because we're getting rid of the repeal.
That's how I see it.
Okay.
I don't see any other sections of yours, and I know the work commissioner, and I don't know what happened with that. What is printed out here in front of us doesn't
So
reflect that commission.
I think the next body of pages that are relevant to us are 193.
And we don't have those available.
Do you want
We only go up to page,
to send me your version?
somehow I got 127 in here.
49 is running up.
So
You said 197?
193.
Well,
Sorry
well,
about that.
um,
I mean, the whole thing is.
why don't we go on, if we can go online and look at the House passed budget in our,
And we have a truncated version, if you'd like us to send that to you for your reference.
That'd be good.
yeah,
Kristen, if we could do that. It carves it down to just the
Yeah.
sections that are relevant to the department.
so, we need to take some time to get online to H 494 as passed by the House. Whoops.
I have it on the screen, what page?
H 490, I don't know, the commissioner. can think.
193.
Okay, let me see if I can get to one.
Yeah, it's section 3E 335, right at the top of the page.
You're taking good notes. Because I'm gonna have to report this back to the appropriations committee.
193, okay, it's up on the screen, if that helps.
Okay. Okay. What page are we on?
193.
193.
All right.
119, right?
Sorry?
119. Or, oh, okay, on 4.
Yeah, I have it starting on line 4.
Let me get to it. Oh, we're doing the old fashioned way. Oh. damn it. Don't. Yeah, I know, I just all flew out the door. And I can't read that. Okay, I can see now. Correctional services out of state beds. I was gonna use, you're starting on page 9, on line 19. Thank you, Peggy.
It actually starts on line 4 of page 193.
Just scroll a little bit, hey.
There.
Yeah.
So this just describes how the out-of-state beds, the surplus from the out-of-state bed contract would be funded. That falls in line with the previous, how we've done it previously.
Version, the official, if you use the unofficial, it gets rid of all the editing marks, and then you won't have quite as many pages. Because the
So
official,
there's
like,
no
tracks the
concerns
changes.
there on 335.
Nothing problem there.
No.
Just a report.
Okay, next section.
That's the authorization portion.
The 335 one, this is the Traverse Rural language. Okay. So Senator, on line 19, starting on line 19 of 193, this describes the work that we did with the House Appropriations Committee to move the out-of-state bed savings to the Justice Reinvestment 2 line item in the department's budget. So basically, the goal of this effort was to try to provide some stability, so we knew year over year how much money would be available to spend on justice reinvestment programs. And this was our attempt to do that, knowing that it's still kind of a complicated funding mechanism. But this was something we worked on with the House, and we support the movement from it being in the out-of-state line to being in the justice reinvestment line. It should be easier for us to track, which we think is good as well.
Good.
338 is just moving some money from the special fund appropriation to facility payments for the Newport and Springfield facilities.
Okay.
Should be no issue there.
Okay, this is another one that was fascinating to me. It's the home detention program that we did away with. We're coming back with.
Yeah, so I
It's a
can,
great idea 10 years ago.
yeah,
It was a lousy idea 5 years ago. Now it's a good idea.
we spent a lot of time on this with House Corrections and Institutions this year. It was the original proposal of the department to end the home detention program. The way the home detention works in Vermont is fairly complicated, and the number of people who were, taking advantage of getting to use the program over the last several years. I mean, this year we averaged 10 people. And the population that it was serving is actually different than I think it was originally intended for. And so it ended up being folks who were facing very violent charges, things like that. However, having talked a lot with House Corrections Institutions, it was the position of the House that they did not want to get rid of the home detention program. And so the department has worked with the judiciary a bit and then internally to try to figure out how do we make this program successful, so that more folks who are detained in the facilities, but maybe could be in a home setting with electronic monitoring could, that feels like a less intrusive detention setting, move them out to their homes. One of the big problems with the program for the Department of Corrections is we historically were using what we called active surveillance of the electronic monitoring system. It wasn't really active because if I cut my ankle bracelet off and leave, somebody's going to get called in the middle of the night, Department of Corrections, and then it begins a response process. But once a person's cut their bracelet off, they're gone, right? So it remained a passive model, but we weren't treating it as such. And so we've worked to redesign some of that. So you'll see the language in here that just specifically calls out the department can use passive electronic monitoring. The
Okay.
And then they requested a report, which you'll see on the
Well,
next,
that's fascinating. They didn't even include the Senate Judiciary Committee.
in 338.
Let's take that out.
The report?
Yeah,
So E338.2.
yeah.
You don't think it makes sense to know how this revamp of the program is working?
Yeah.
So to be clear, what the House did not revamp the program, but the department has taken that work on itself.
Yes, no, I understood that, but I think it'd be helpful for us to know like how you're doing that. and how
Well,
it's
you
working.
wouldn't know because you're not part of the report.
Maybe we should add us to the report. I also thought this needed to change. We could omit the House.
Just replace yourselves with HCI.
Yeah,
That
why
would be
don't we
fine.
do that then? Put down proposed legislation to the Senate Committee on Judiciary.
Great.
Seriously?
I am serious. I am serious. They want to insult us, we can insult them.
I have a feeling
I
it'll
was
get fixed
kidding.
in conference.
After the report, there are some repeals. I think some of that is language changes. Ben may be able to speak to that a little better. The one thing I'll call out is line 13. It actually sunsets the home detention program in 2025.
Why would we do that?
Yeah, so what a lot of the conversation in House Corrections is that home detention may still have some merit, but it would seem to be underutilized, for lack of a better term. And Commissioner, I think there are less than 10 people on the home detention program. And so I think part of the sunset conversation was, let's see if this revamp that you're working on and the report back now to the Senate Judiciary Committee is effective. And then the sunset would force the legislature to revisit it as it was to continue it or just
Well,
bring it to 10.
My argument would be, even if it's just 10 people, that's 10 people who are not in prison.
Mhm.
And to sunset it, and, maybe people forgot it, and it gets sunsetted, and then you don't have it anymore. I think it's a mistake. I realize it should be more than 10 people and probably not effective, but it's 10 people who are not in prison. That's not a problem.
I agree. I wholeheartedly agree that every person we have that is able to not be in our prison system is positive. And if we are going to put some sort of sunset in, I don't know that a year is enough time to truly get a sense of how the impact of the revamp that you're doing. So I agree with Senator Sears.
There may be a lot of people, one of the things that is obvious to me, but I'm sure is obvious to you, is that you have a much more violent group who are actually incarcerated. And if we can keep a few more non-violent offenders out of jail and not be subject to some of that violence, I think the better off we are. So I would argue against any repeal, but if you want one, I agree with Senator Bowski, that should be later than 25.
I can just,
And just
go ahead.
so for some more context from House Corrections too, this was initially asked to be repealed outright currently, and they brought it back, and I think this was sort of the balancing considerations that the committee had.
Well,
Yeah, it just seems sort of counterintuitive to me to say, hey, do a bunch of work to make this a better system, and then next year we're gonna get rid of it.
I think the goal of HCI and putting the repeal language in there, and that was not a request of the department, but the goal was to put pressure on the legislature to revisit it so that, I know, and it does seem kind of counterintuitive, but the goal was to get the legislature to look at it again.
I wish I could revamp the Wyndham County program that we had for home detention for people that were not, rather than incarcerating people who were on detention. And because that kept quite a few people out of jail, but there was a guy from Bennington County, I mentioned him on the floor. He drove truck for a furniture company, so they were able to move him to Rutland. The truck he was driving was for Rutland and not Bennington anymore. He had been charged with domestic assault. He was going to go to jail. Instead of going to jail, he paid his child support. He paid taxes. He was not in jail, and everything turned out very well. And by the time he got to court on the charges, you know, it was probation. And so I think, you know, there's value to detention, but for your department, I don't think we should repeal it, quite frankly.
And we have no, as we said, we're reforming
I
our
mean, you can come
process.
back in 2025 and say, we believe this should be repealed, we're not using it, it doesn't work, blah, 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 let the legislature decide.
Yeah, we're reforming the process, and I think what we're coming up with is a very practical and effective way to run the program, and so that's not language we were wedded to. So I think whatever the prerogative of the committee is, certainly is
I'm
fine.
good with that.
Yeah.
Everybody good with that?
Yeah.
Okay, now on to the supervision of adult inmates at correctional facilities.
So I think, yeah, Ben, if you want to take.
Yeah,
that
just,
one.
this is really a largely technical change, so this is about the absconding language that,
Yep.
if you remember, that's 127 last year, Senator
Yes,
Sears.
and that's why we had it.
Right, and so what this is doing is it's used in another statute, 808, the 808E. This just moves the absconding definition from 724 to the definition section of the whole subchapter. So when it's used, it has the same meaning. So it's really a lot, you know, it looks like a bigger change, but in reality, it's really just a technical move of the definition from 724 to 722, because it's also used in 808.
All of this language is good by. we're really-
Yeah, I think it's largely cleanup language as far as I understand it.
So it all has that community supervision. Everybody know what this was.
And it shouldn't
For
change.
those of you who weren't here last year,
And
either in the
then,
House or the Senate, was it last year we did this?
Yeah.
and there was one oversight on my part in moving it where it references in 808E, so this is on line 9 of page 198. It only references subdivision 722(1)A of the title. Which if you look at that, that's only one part of the 3-part definition of absconding. And it should, based on my conversations, I believe with the Department of Dale Crook in particular, it should be the whole definition. So it should be changed to 722.
You want to get us that.
I will.
So none of
Send a
this,
copy to Stephanie.
none of this should substantively change any of the work the department's doing. So you shouldn't notice any changes there. It's really technical adjustments.
Are there other things in the budget?
I think that's it.
Any other questions? Good.
All right.
Commissioner, enjoy your day with
Thanks, sir.
Secretary Wenzel and Mike Thompson.
Yes, I will. I've been looking forward to it for a number of
They
months.
have plans for you.
Oh, boy. Good plans or bad plans?
I don't know. They invited me to go to McGillicuddy's in Waterbury. That's Wenzel's new favorite place. He says it's a great Irish bar.
He's setting up shop in Waterbury.
He comes in, you know, I mean, the man